late, especially as the Senate takes up a jobs bill. And joining me now to discuss all this, two men who are known to reach across the aisle and are also on the front lines in dealing with this struggling economy. California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell. They're also leading a bipartisan organization, Building America's Future, dedicated to rebuilding the infrastructure in the country. We'll get to that. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Let's start with the economy. The nation's governors, including, of course, the two of you, are here in Washington. And the chairman of the Governors Association, Jim Douglas of Vermont, said very starkly, looking at the economy, at the impact on states, budgets, employment, the rest, he said the worst probably is yet to come. Do you agree with that, Governor Schwarzenegger?
I believe that the worst is over.
The worst is over.
I think that the economy, we see signs of a comeback, but it's very clear that the comeback is not going to be as quick as we have seen in the past. It's slow, but we've seen in our revenues that there's more than $1 billion a month coming in more than we anticipated. We've seen that the foreclosure rate has slowed down. We've seen that the house sales have picked up. We've seen people are getting back to work, and especially in the green sector. So there's signs all over, but the key thing is not to be overly optimistic, just to be optimistic and to keep pushing. And I think the responsibility that we have as on a state level is to do, even though we have limited amount of power, but to do everything that we can to create jobs, to get the economy back and to create those jobs, because that is the important thing. We in California have a 12% unemployment rate, and the faster we get the people back to work, the better it is.
What's the view from Harrisburg? The worst is yet to come, or the worst is over?
I agree with Governor Schwarzenegger. Our economy's done much better. We're at about 8.8% unemployment. I think the lowest of any big state. We have a very diversified economy that's sort of gotten us through this, although 8.8% is terrible, obviously. But we've seen real signs of improvement. In the last 3 months together, we only lost 4,300 jobs, and we were losing 40,000 a month a year ago. So things are getting better. Arnold is right. Our economists predict growth will actually return next year, 3% growth, not great. The following year, they predict 4.5% growth, which is almost where we were in the beginning of the last decade, in the middle of the last decade. But I think what Jim Douglas was referring to is the states are going to really have a problem when the stimulus money drops off. It's going to be a problem. But again, stimulus was never meant a permanent solution. It was meant to do two things. One, to be a bridge till growth returns, and it has been a very helpful bridge. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. We would have had to lay off 50,000 more people had we not had the federal stimulus funds. And then secondly, President Obama did something wise. A lot of the programs are long-term programs, the green energy jobs, the broadband, the electrical grid jobs. Those jobs, that benefit from the stimulus is going to stretch out over the next 5 to 10 years. So states are going to have a management problem of their own budget when the stimulus funds drop off. But the economy, I agree with the governor's estimate, is coming back slowly, I think surely. Well,
the Senate, as I said, is taking up a jobs bill this week, $15 billion. When it started at the White House, it was $200 billion. The House passed a $180 billion version. There was a deal for $85 billion. We're down to $15 billion now. But do you think there needs to be another stimulus, federal stimulus like this? Is $15 billion enough?
Well, I don't think that we need another stimulus as much as what we need is just to do what we have been, talking about for the last 2 years. And that is rebuild America, because that will create jobs. That's why it is so important to think about the infrastructure, because we happen to be at a stage right now where if we don't rebuild our infrastructure, we're going to fall behind economically, and we're not going to be the #1 nation anymore. I mean, right now we are the most powerful nation, but it is because we have this great infrastructure, and over the last 100 years we have built. But in the last few decades we have stopped maintaining that infrastructure, and we have stopped building and expanding that infrastructure, even though there's tremendous demand for that infrastructure. So if you build this infrastructure and do what was recommended, the $2.2 trillion of infrastructure, that will put a huge amount of people to work, and it really will stimulate the economy. And they did that also in the 40s and in the 50s, and Eisenhower did it in the 50s, and even into the 60s. The height of infrastructure was in the early 60s, was the height. And even when I came here to this country, there was this enormous boom of expansion of freeways and bridges and waterways and the universities and all this. And now we kind of like only spending 2.5% of our GDP on infrastructure rather than the 5% that we should be spending.
$2.2 trillion. We had money back in the 1950s and 60s. That is a gigantic amount of money. And when people think about infrastructure, they get it. Roads, bridges, they understand it. But wasn't there $200 billion or so worth of infrastructure spending in the stimulus a year ago?
Well, there was actually a little less than we recommended to the president when we met with him when he was president-elect. I would have liked to have seen the infrastructure money in the original stimulus at least doubled. And so did Senator Boxer and some other people in the Senate. But still, it was a nice hunk of money. But it just scratches the surface. And the governor is right. What's great about infrastructure spending is, one, we need it for safety, we need it for quality of life, and we need it for economic competitiveness. But two, it's the best job creator. Economists, Terry, say for $1 billion of infrastructure spending, we create 40,000 jobs that can't be outsourced, that are here in America, that are good, family-sustaining jobs. And they're not just jobs on the construction site. We've seen this in our stimulus figures. They're jobs back at the steel factories and the asphalt factories and the concrete factories and the electrical factories and the wood and timber factories. So if you want to preserve American manufacturing and get it to thrive again and put this country back to work in a long term. And the key is here. Your lead-in said, is Washington broken? And sure, it's broken because of the partisanship. But it's also broken because nobody plans. Nobody's willing to do something for 10 years down the road. Everybody thinks about the next election. We need a plan, a 10-year plan that's going to take us to a first-class infrastructure that'll keep us competitive. The port of Shanghai in 5 years will take more throughput than all American ports put together.
10-year plan's not something that the United States government does very well. But the stimulus, that was a big debate here this week. Both of you were supporters of it. The Republican Party, though, staked out a pretty stark position on the stimulus. It was summed up by Mitt Romney at the CPAC convention this week when he basically, this is his take, and really speaking for the